Welcome to class. Okay, wait. Okay, welcome to class. Today we are learning how to crochet really from the bottom up. So if you've never crocheted before, if you've never held yarn in your hand before, or if you don't never had a crochet hook, then you're in the right place. We're going to learn everything you need to learn as a beginner. So, this is a great opportunity to learn to get the foundation right so that we're ready to take what we learned today and move it forward. And we'll be able to make even more complicated projects as we progress. We're going to do Crochet 102 next week, and then Crochet 103 the week after that. So it kind of builds on itself. And by the end, you'll be able to make a lot of really exciting projects. So today, we're going to learn everything we need to know to make these little wristers or little hand warmers. So we're going to make these little wristers or hand warmers. And also I'm going to show you a little bit how to alter the pattern to make longer ones, because those little ones don't really keep my wrist warm. So I like a longer one. So we're going to talk about some things we can do to change the pattern to suit it to your own needs, which I think is the best part about making stuff. You can make it however you want it to be. So the pattern that we're going to be following along, the pattern that we're going to be reviewing after class calls for this yarn, which is Heartland, which is a size number 4 yarn. But in class, I'm going to be demonstrating with this Wool Ease Thick and Quick. I like to use a nice thick yarn like this for demonstrating because it shows up nice on camera. The stitches are larger and it makes it easier for the students to see what I'm doing. So you don't need this one for class, but this is one of my favorite yarns, this Wool Ease Thick and Quick. And if you do want to make the wristers afterwards, this is what it calls for, is this Heartland. So that's why I'm using 2 different yarns. Sometimes we get questions about that. So do I have any questions before we get started?
Nope, I think we're ready to jump right in.
All right, so let's go ahead and switch the camera to the view of my hands. And we'll go ahead and get started. There's a lot of exciting things to cover. Okay, so just a little bit about yarn. Whenever you buy yarn, you want to look on the label. This yarn is a super bulky number 6. And then it tells you what size knitting needle you should get, but it's also telling us what size crochet hook we should use. So it's advising that we use an N13, which is a 9 millimeter. So you might hear somebody say an N or a 9 millimeter. They mean the same thing. So it's just 2 different ways of describing the same hook. So whenever you buy yarn, look and see how thick the yarn is and see what kind of crochet hook you're going to need. So like this one, it's a size 5, so it's a little bit smaller. And this one is using a K, which is a 6.5 millimeter. So a little bit smaller. So that the label will always advise what size hook you should be using. Now, if you don't have that size hook, you can go up or down a hook size, and it usually doesn't make a lot of difference, especially for simple projects. So don't get too hung up on whether or not you have the right hook. But you can usually make it work if you have one that's pretty close. And then here's a crochet hook. Seems really simple. There's just some different parts to it as we're talking about crochet that you might want to know about, just so that you understand what I'm saying. So this pointy bit right here is called the head of the crochet hook. And then down here is the mouth, where the hook kind of opens up, it's where the mouth is. The throat is right along here, and then this is the neck. And then this is the finger rest right here. And then the shaft, basically this is the shaft and then the finger rest. So different crochet hook manufacturers make crochet hooks that are shaped a little bit different. Sometimes they're really pointy. Sometimes the mouth is really deep or very shallow. Sometimes the neck and the throat are very angular or maybe not as much. So if you find a crochet hook that you really, really love, then that might be the one for you. And if you get a crochet hook and you really can't seem to make it work in your hand, then try a different one that's maybe shaped a little bit different. You can get metal ones, wooden ones, or plastic ones. So I usually like either the wooden or the metal. So that's a little bit, just a little bit about the yarn and a crochet hook. Any questions about that before we move on?
I think we are ready to go ahead with our slip knot.
All right. So I'm going to be using, this is my ball of yarn right here. And the first thing we need to do is tie a slip knot. Now, there are many, many different ways of tying a slip knot. So if you already know how to knit, or if you were a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout and you already know how to tie a slip knot, however you're tying a slip knot is probably fine. So you don't have to get too hung up on this. But if you don't know how to tie a slip knot, I'm going to show you a way. So I called this method is called short over long. So I've got my tail, which is short. And then I've got the rest of my yarn is my working yarn, and it's long. I think it's like 89 yards long or something, 80 yards. So it's very long. So we're going to do short over long. So you put the tail over top of your working yarn, and you want to make a circle like this. So you're just going to make a little circle. You're going to put your hand inside the circle, and then you're going to sneak under that. And then you're going to grab hold of your tail. And now you're going to hold your tail and your working yarn together and then just kind of loop it back through. And then when you loop it back through, you end up with your slip knot. And I'll do this again so you can see. In crocheting, it is preferable that the tail is what controls the size of the slip knot. So if we pull the tail, that's what makes the size of the slip knot kind of get smaller. And that's preferable for crochet. And later on, when you're making more complicated projects, you'll understand, it'll make more sense. But just for now, just know that is a little better for you for crochet. All right, so we make a circle. We put the tail over the working yarn. So we've got short over long. Put your hand under it. You're going to sneak under it. You're going to grab hold of your tail, and then I'm going to hold the working yarn and the tail together, and then all I'm doing is I'm just looping it around my finger and pulling it back through, and then that is my slip knot, and you can see the tail controls the size of the slip knot. All right, any questions about that? You want me to see it again, to show it again? Is there a certain place where you're not understanding? What can I do? How are we doing, Claire?
I think we're doing pretty good, but we could stand to see that again.
Okay. So make a circle, like an oval or a circle shape. The short piece goes over the long, so short over long. Put your hand inside the circle, and you're going to sneak under that. You're going to grab a hold of the tail, and you're going to hold the working yarn and the tail together, and then you're just going to loop that around your finger, the tail, and pull it through. And that is all there is to it. And then in real life, I just do it like that. So once you learn how to do it, then it becomes much easier. It's very simple once you know how, but when you don't know how to do something, it looks much more complicated. All right, we feel pretty good about that.
I think if you could rotate your hand when you're showing how to pull the loop through, that's the part that we're having a little trouble with.
So we make a loop, put the short piece over the long, put your hand in the center of the loop, and you're going to just hold on to the tail. Let me see if I can turn my hand over. Do it this way. Okay. So you're just going to kind of hold on to the tail around one of your fingers. And then you're going to hold the working yarn and the tail together. It's very important to hold those two together. And then you're just going to pull that loop back through. And that makes the slip knot. So really all we're doing is we're just grabbing hold of that tail and pulling it through. So hold this tail so it doesn't all the way pull through. Hold the working yarn. I'm going to try to turn my hand over and make it so it's easier. So really you're just holding it. It's not like you have to make a loop or do anything special. I did say loop, but you're just kind of holding the tail. And then as you pull it through, it kind of turns into a loop. So it's much easier than it sounds. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
That helps? All
Yeah.
right. Okay, so now we're going to use our crochet hook. And you just put that right on, pop that right onto your crochet hook. And we want to cinch it up, but we don't want it to be tight. So we want to make sure it slides very loose and free on our hook. We don't want this, we don't want it like that. We want to cinch it up around the crochet hook and then maybe loosen it just a little because you don't want it to be very tight. Okay. Now, the first thing for crochet, we do have to start with a chain. And the chain it's the base of it, and that's going to determine how wide your piece is going to be. So if you were making a scarf, which is like 8 inches wide, you might chain like 10 or 15 or 20, depending on how big your yarn is. If you're making a blanket, like a baby blanket, which might be 3 feet wide, you might chain like 300. So just kind of keep that in your mind that however many chains you do, that will determine how wide your project is. If you're following a pattern, the pattern will tell you how many to chain. But if you're just playing around and making something on your own, that's what happens. The chain will determine how many stitches you're going to end up working with and how wide it's going to be. So hold your hook in your hand and in your dominant hand, and then in your non-dominant hand, you're going to hold the yarn. And this is how I hold mine. I tension my yarn around my middle finger and my ring finger. And as I'm working, the yarn kind of slides through my fingers and I can grip it tight so it doesn't, and it's very tight, or I can relax my fingers and let it move through. So that's how I hold my yarn. People hold their yarn many different ways, but that's the system that works for me. And also you want to make sure you're holding the tail when you're starting out. So you want to hold the tail right there so that basically you're just tensioning it. You're making it a little bit tense, and it makes it, you have to have, it's like a tightrope. They can't walk on a slack tightrope, so that you just have to make sure you have to have it tense so that you can work with it. And then you take your hook, and you're going to go around and grab your yarn, and the yarn is going to go into the mouth of the hook. And then you're going to turn your hook down, and then you're going to pull that through your slip knot, and that is my first chain. All right. Where am I? Trying to make sure you can see it. So you're going to pick up your yarn, turn your hook down, and pull it back through. And that's what creates the chain. You're just pulling it through the loops. Now, the reason you have to turn your hook down, if you try to pull it this way, then the top of that loop is also going to get stuck in the mouth of the hook. So you have to turn it down, and that's why we don't want it tight on the hook too, because we want to have a little space here. There's like a little window that the hook has to move through. And if it was super tight, then you wouldn't be able to do it. So that's why we need it to be slightly looser. Pick up the yarn, turn the hook down, and pull it through. And when you first start out, you're holding the tail. But as you get some length on it, you want to readjust your grip so that you're holding it like right under this where your hook is. And then as you make a couple of stitches, I always readjust my grip and move it up. Like once it starts now, it's not quite so easy. So you readjust your grip so that you're pulling it down and opening that window, and you pull it back through. All right, now I'll start over and show you again, but as I'm doing that, what questions do we have?
We do have a good question here from Carl. Does the slip knot count as a chain?
The slip knot does not count as a chain. So, well, we'll talk about that as we go. well, I'll show you how to count the chains and how it all works out. So, but you start with your slip knot, and then if it says chain 10, then you chain 10. So you've got your slip knot plus your chain 10. So, but we'll count it, and then I'll show you exactly how to count them. Okay, so starting with my slip knot again. Okay, slip knot. I'm going to put it on. I'm going to cinch it up so that it's snug, but not too tight. And then, maybe you just jiggle your hook to kind of loop. You want to have a window that you can work through about like that. And you'll get the hang of it. And as you practice, it'll become more natural in your hand. But you don't want it tight. You want that little space there. And then you hold it. You want to make sure you're giving your yarn the tension that you need. So this is how I hold mine. Wrap the yarn around the hook, and then it turns down and goes through. Pick up your yarn, goes through. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. So if you want to work along with me in class today, our little practice piece, we're just working on this for practice. We're going to chain 11. So we're going to chain 11, but we're only going to have 10 stitches. So that's a little bit of a tricky situation, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But I'm going to stop here. I'm going to rest here for just a second and see if anyone has any questions.
We've got some questions about how to keep the stitches in the chain even, or how do you know if you're making them too tight or too loose?
Well, that's a very good question, and it is very important. The only way you can do that is with practice. So that's why this is a practice piece, and we're not jumping right into making the hand warmers, because it's going to take you some practice to figure out how tight and how loose to make them. And as you're working through the stitches, if they're too tight to work through, then obviously they're too tight. And if they're very big and floppy, then they're too loose. You'll get a feel for it, but it only comes with practice. But they should look like this. It shouldn't be like, there shouldn't be like open space you can see through it, but it should feel soft so that it's not like real tight. Okay. Now I started mine with this hook, which is a 10 millimeter. And now I'm going to switch to a 9 millimeter because sometimes the chain can get very, very tight. Usually the chain becomes very tight, and you don't want your chain to be tight because it can affect the way your finished piece feels. It will not be stretchy. I like to chain with a larger hook and then switch to the other hook where I'm going to make the body of the work out of. So that's why I changed hooks. That's a little trick that I like to use. Do we want to count the chains, or do you want to see them again, or where are we, Claire? How are we?
Yes, show us how to count the chains and then remind us again how many stitches we need if we want to follow along.
Okay. So if you want to follow along, I want you to chain 11. So the loop on your hook does not count. So we're not going to count that. And if you look at the chain, what we're going to be looking at are kind of these V shapes right here. And you can see they kind of fit into each other.
Hold that a little closer, Darren. That's good, thank you.
Right there. All right. And so here's how you count them. So the loop does not count, and we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I only have 10. I thought I had 11. Let's double check. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's an example of why it's a good idea to count your stitches in your chain to make sure you're doing exactly what you need to do, because it's easy to lose count. All right, so I added 1, so now I have 10. So were you able to see what I was doing? Can you see where I was counting, or do you want to see it again?
I think if you could hold it up a little closer to the camera as you're counting, and
Well,
then we probably need to move on because we're about halfway through class already.
okay, so the loop doesn't count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that is 11. Okay. So in crochet, when we're working on a row, what we have to do is we have to do one extra chain to create the side. We want to create the height of that side, and that's what causes us to have, we're going to have 11 chains, but we're only going to have 10 stitches, because this first chain is going to go up on its side, and we're going to be able to have that. So let me just show you. So we skip one, we skip that first one, and that, I wasn't describing that very well. So the loop, not the loop, it's this first chain. That first chain right there will become our side stitch. And I was kind of making it look like the loop was. So what we want to do is you just want to kind of find the hole in the chain with your finger. We're skipping the first one, kind of right there. So we're going to go right through there. You enter the chain, wrap the yarn, bring it through, wrap the yarn, and bring it through both. So now what we're learning is called single crochet. And this is what we're going to make our entire piece out of. So the chain is just the first layer, kind of the first foundation. And then the whole body of this piece is going to be made out of single crochet. And then you're going to find your next chain. You enter the chain, wrap your yarn, bring it through. You have 2 loops on your hook. Wrap yarn over, pull it through both. And then you go to the next chain. You can kind of open that hole with your finger so you can find it. Enter the stitch, yarn over, pull it through, 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull it through both. All right. What questions do we have? Is there a certain spot where you're not able to see what I'm doing clearly? I just want to make sure. I'm never sure if it's how it's showing up on camera. So count your chains, like there's 1, 2, 3. So there are my 3 next chains, 1, 2, 3. So that means I'm going to go in this one next. So find the chain. You can put your finger there. I like to make a little opening so I can see where I'm going. So push the head of your crochet hook through. Grab the yarn with the mouth of the hook. Pull it back through. 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over. And pull it through both. And then this is kind of what it looks like in real life once you get the hang of it. So once you get the hang of it, it actually goes pretty fast. It's a good thing about crochet, it actually goes really fast. So I've got 1, 2, 3 chains left. So here's my next one. So it's a good idea to like kind of stop and make sure you see where you are and what you're looking at. So enter the chain, wrap your yarn, do a yarn over, bring it through, yarn over, and bring it through both loops. Enter the chain, yarn over, pull it through, yarn over, pull it through both. Now, if you're really struggling with this and having a really hard time, don't get frustrated, because if if this is the first time you're ever doing this, it's gonna feel really strange in your hand. And you're gonna feel like you're kind of all thumbs and you like, why can't I even hold yarn in my hand? Like, I can't understand this. So you're holding a crochet hook, you're holding your project, and you're holding the needle. So it's almost like you need three hands. So it's a bit complicated, but once you practice, it will start to become more natural in your hand. So don't panic. It looks really easy when I'm doing it because I've been crocheting my whole life, really. So I've been crocheting probably for almost 50 years. So that's very easy for me. So, but once you learn it, it'll become quite easy for you as well. So here's my first single crochet. I'm going to look at it from the top. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Did I lose one? I may have lost one. This is a good learning experience. I wanted to have 10. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I do have 10. So it's always a good idea to stop and count and make sure you didn't add one or lose one. And what I'm counting are these kind of V shapes again at the top. It kind of looks like your chain, but not exactly. If you turn it to the side and look at it, there will be more holes on this that you can see. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. You can count the holes. You can count the little V's on the top, or you can count the posts kind of in between the holes. There's different ways of counting it. I usually count the little V's on the top. All right. Any questions? What questions? I'll be glad to answer any and all questions.
I think at the start of the next row, we can cover how to chain and turn. And then we have a couple people who just want to see how you hold the yarn and the hook as you're working.
Okay, I'm going to try to get my... All right, so I did my chain. I'm sorry, I did 10 single crochets. And when you finish your row, that's how I just kind of drag it between my middle finger and my ring finger. And then I kind of twist my hand and tension it over my index finger and hold it like that. So this is how my mother holds her yarn, and she taught me how to crochet, so I learned from her. So that's kind of how when I try to think about how I'm doing it, I can't do it, but that's how it is. It's between my ring finger and my middle finger. And that's how I control the tension. I squeeze those two fingers together or release them, and then I tension it over my index finger. Okay. So I did 10 single crochet. I finished my row. Now what I have to do, I have to chain one. And this is called, you'll hear it called chaining up or just chaining and turning. So I did my chain one, and the chain one becomes that side. It gives us the height to move on to the next row. Otherwise, that first stitch would be like leaning in really very badly. Okay, so you chain one and then you turn because we're always kind of working in the same direction. And after we turn, the chain one, for what we're doing today, the chain one does not count as a stitch. So we're not going to count that as a stitch, but we have 10 single crochets. Enter the first one. You want to go under both of those strands of yarn. So there's kind of a little hole there for us. We're going to go through that, and we're going to go under both strands. I'm going to do it wrong to show you what it looks like wrong. You could go through here, but you haven't gone through both strands. So we're not doing that. We're going through both. And then wrap your yarn. Bring it through. You have 2 loops on your hook. Wrap your yarn. And then bring it through. Okay. Enter the stitch. Wrap your yarn. Bring it through. Yarn over. Pull it through both loops. That is a single crochet. Enter the stitch. Wrap the yarn. Bring it through. I changed the grip of my hook because I changed the position so you can see, but you wouldn't normally do that. Wrap the yarn and pull it through. All right, what questions are there?
Let's see here. Someone wants to see a little bit more how you're using your right hand to rotate that hook to pull the yarn through.
Okay, so I'm just turning it like that. Just bring it through. Use the head of your needle, of your crochet hook, to kind of force it through that hole. If you don't have a nice opening like that, a nice hole to work through, you might be crocheting too tight. So try to relax in your hand a little bit, but it should be fairly easy to get through there. So we're going to go through that, through both. See right here, this one shows up a little better. I'm going under both strands of yarn. So go under both strands of yarn, wrap your yarn, do a yarn over. And see, that's all I'm doing. I'm just turning my hook down, just turning it down. Bring it through, yarn over. And see, I'm just turning it. However, I mean, you don't have to turn it this way. You could turn your whole wrist, but I usually just flip it with my fingers. Turn it and bring it through both. Does that answer that question? Go through both. Enter the stitch, yarn over, turn your hook down. If you had your hook up, you're not really grabbing the yarn. So that's what's kind of grabbing it. So you kind of have to turn it to grab the yarn, pull it through. And there you go. What other questions can I help with? And then again, once you get practiced, then it goes much faster.
Can you show what it might look like if you accidentally skipped a stitch?
So there's my next stitch. And you can do that. It doesn't look so bad, really. And that's kind of the problem, because it might be hard to tell that you skipped one. Sometimes people will do that to do a decrease. They'll just skip a stitch. It's not the best way to do it, but it is a way. So I skipped a stitch. You really can't tell. I mean, it doesn't look, that's the kind of a problem, though. It's hard to tell exactly if you skipped one or not. It doesn't show up as much as you would think. What other questions?
I did clarify this in chat a little earlier, but since we're now working into a row of stitches, that's why we're going under 2 pieces of yarn versus working into the chain when you go under 1 piece of yarn.
Correct. When you make the chain looks similar to the stitches, but it's not the same. There are more than one way to enter the chain. Today we learned the easiest way, which is the best way for beginners, where you go under 1 strand, but there are other ways, just knowing that going forward as you're learning. And then once you work into the chain, the first row, you can't work into the chain again because you've got a whole row of stitches on top of the chain. So then every other row really from now on with this project will be working directly into stitches, right? So if you turn it to the side, you can kind of see there's my next stitch. There's the next one. So kind of push the head of your needle through, yarn over, turn it down, pull it through, yarn over, pull it through both. And it's also really important, most of the action's happening with the hook, but this left hand is actually doing quite a bit as well. You want to make sure you're holding. I always like to hold my work like right there where my next stitch is, because it kind of tensions it for me. And then as I kind of progress, I hand, like you don't want to end up like keeping it back here, trying to work into it. Make sure you're moving your left hand to go right with it. That's my last stitch, so I'm going to chain up, turn my work, and turning your work is just that easy. I finished my row, I chained up, and you're just turning your work. It doesn't matter. You can completely drop it, and there's no special way to turn your work. And then when you pick it back up, just position it the way you need it. So we want to start our next row with our working loop on the right, and we're going to move across. So sometimes people get hung up on how do you turn your work. Well, it doesn't matter. You just turn it, lay it down like this, make sure you're positioned right, and then you're correct. Just go from here. Okay. I'm going to do one more row.
Ooh, before you start, we have a couple questions about how you know when you've gotten to the end of the row.
Oh, I was
So can
going
you
to
show us how to use your favorite tool?
I was just going to do that. Yes. So I know this is my first stitch just because I just made it and I know what to look for. So this will help you keep track of where you are. So I'm going to go in that first stitch, bring up my loop, yarn over, and bring it through 2. And I'm going to just lay that down for a second. This is called a stitch marker. You can use a safety pin, but because the safety pin kind of has a coil there, it can get tangled in the yarn. So these are much nicer for crochet. And I'm going to put a stitch marker. I just made that stitch, so I know that's my first stitch. So I'm going to put a stitch marker under both legs of that stitch. Now I know that's my first stitch. And I'm going to work all the way across. I'm going to do this kind of fast so I can get across and show you what to do over there. And this will, sometimes in crochet, the hard thing to know is where is the beginning of the row and where is the end of the row. Okay, now you can start this from the once you make your chain and you start your first row of single crochets, you should start it then and you'll always know exactly where you are. Okay, so I just made this last stitch, so I'm 100% sure that's my last one. And if I were going to crochet into that stitch, that's where I would crochet into it. So I'm just going to put my stitch marker right there. And now I know exactly, I have my first stitch and I have my last stitch. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So as you're learning, it's a good idea to count your stitches every time. And so I have to do my chain 1. So for single crochet, you do a chain 1 to make that height. You turn it over. I always lay mine down like this as I'm teaching so you can see what's happening. You wouldn't normally have to do this. So here's my row. This was my first stitch and this was my last stitch, but now that we've flipped it over, as I'm approaching them, this will be the first stitch on this row and the last stitch. And then my chain up creates the side. So that little extra chain up is what creates the height to give me the height to go this direction. Otherwise, if I didn't chain up, that first single crochet would be kind of pinched in and it wouldn't look nice, right? So now that I've got that stitch marker there, I know exactly where to go. I don't have to wonder and I don't have to doubt myself. And I'm going to move it to the next one because I just made the first stitch, so I'm 100% sure. First stitch. Now I'm going to go all the way across, so enter the next stitch. It's easy to find the stitches. I just did that one. And if you just kind of drag your finger across the back of your work until you come to the next hole, that's a good way to look for it too. So here's the post, and here's the next hole. I'm in this hole, there's the post, and that's the next hole. So that's a way to help you find your stitches as you're looking for them. Or you can look for this V shape on the top. Sometimes if your yarn's really fuzzy though, it's easier to feel for the stitch, feel for that hole. And then, so after I do this, we'll take questions. I'm just going fast so I can show you at the end how to do it. And then I'll be glad to take any and all questions. Okay. Now, if you were stretching your work, or if something happened, or if maybe whatever happened, that could look like it was my last stitch, right? Because it looks like this is almost a straight line. So it's easy to kind of miss that last stitch. So that's why. But if you shape it up right, you can kind of see there's like a little stair step there. So it is easy. And if you're working with small yarn, sometimes it's easy to miss the first or the last stitch. It can kind of get pushed in with the other stitches and it's easy to miss. But because I have that stitch marker, I'm not going to miss it and it's not going to trick me. So I'm going to go right through. I know that's my last one. I'm going to do my single crochet and I'm going to move this stitch, I'm sorry, the stitch marker up. I know that's my last stitch because I just made it. And I'm going to chain up, chain one, turn my work, and let's stop here and I will take any questions. What questions do we have?
All right, let me go back through here. I think the stitch markers did help a lot of people. I want to
It
say,
helps me.
don't be afraid to use them. I needed them when I started too, because
Yes.
my piece just kept getting narrower and narrower, and I didn't know what was going on.
Mine were always shaped like this. It's like I was losing a stitch on one side and adding one on the other side. And it was, I don't know, it was weird. So.
Just a reminder, yes, we are recording this class and it'll be posted on the Michael's YouTube channel. So you can pause and rewind and go back as many times as you need to.
Yes.
And I will go ahead and post both the handout here, and then I'll go ahead and put the pattern in there as well, because we've got about 15 minutes left in class and we need to go over that really quickly as well.
Why don't we, let's go over the pattern because I feel like that's important. And after we review the pattern, if there are more questions, we can try to come back to them if we have time. Does that sound like a good idea, Claire?
That sounds like a plan.
Okay. So. Where's my pattern? All right, so this pattern, it's a free pattern, a free crochet pattern by Lion Brand, and it's using Heartland Yarn, and it's just crochet level 1 wristers. So you can print this pattern from lionbrand.com as well, or from the link that Claire put in. It's always going to be available for you. So if you lose it or something, you can always, find another one. So I made some notes on this one. I did 4 strands of Lion Brand baby alpaca with a J hook. And that's what created these nice, big, thick wristers. So if you change the pattern, you might want to make notes, see exactly what you did. So that's what you'll be seeing there. So I'll kind of cover that up so it's out of the way. So when you're looking at a pattern, the skill level was a beginner. The size, about 6.5 inches by 5 inches. So yours might not be exactly that, but it'll be pretty close. Materials needed, Lion Brand Heartland yarn. The original ones were made in Yellowstone. Lion Brand crochet hook size I9. So let's look at that. That's a question right there, because right here it's telling me on this yarn I should use a J, but the pattern is saying a 9, which is a 5.5 millimeter, but the bar of yarn says a 6 millimeter. So the reason they want you to use a different size hook than what's recommended is they want the wristers to be crocheted up tightly. So that way it will help keep the cold air out a little better. So you could even go down one more hook size if you wanted to make them very dense. Also, just so you know about this, it says you need to use Heartland yarn, which is a beautiful yarn. It's one of my favorites. I do love Heartland. But this is another yarn you could use. This is called Scarfy, and it works up in kind of a self-striping pattern, so it's really fun. It's another really great yarn you could use if you decide. And then this one is Wool Ease worsted weight. It's a classic. It's always a great yarn to go to. It's a number 4, so you could use Wool Ease instead. So just because the pattern is telling you to use a certain yarn, you can try different ones if you have a different yarn that you like. And all of these yarns are available on michaels.com or on lionbrand.com. So just so you have lots, I love to have choices. I love to have lots and lots of choices. So the crochet hook and large-eyed blunt needles for finishing and for weaving in your ends. So a large-eyed blunt needle, it has a large eye so that it's very easy to put yarn through, and it's blunt. So it's nice when things make sense. Large-eyed blunt needle, it's got a large eye and it's blunt. So I like it when things make sense. Okay. So gauge, we're not going to get hung up on gauge. Gauge is a very, very confusing topic sometimes. You can really kind of make it confusing. But 16 single crochets equal about 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And if you match your gauge exactly, then your finished project will be the exact same measurements. But for beginning projects and for this project, this is not important. So we don't have to worry about that. If you're going to make a sweater, or if you wanted to make a pillow cover and your pillow was 24 by 24, you would need to figure out how many stitches, to make it 24 inches. That's where gauge comes in. So it has to be exact if you need it to be an exact size. But we're not going to get caught in that trap today because it's a lot to talk about. Now, after all that, we're going to start with our wristers. We're going to actually start our project. So we're going to chain 21. Okay, so first off, it's telling us we need to chain 21. It doesn't tell us to make a slip knot, right? It didn't say make a slip knot. It thinks you know. So we know we need to make a slip knot before we start chaining. So we're going to start with our slip knot, which is implied, and we're going to chain 21. Now we're chaining 21. There's something else we know because 21. We're going to have 20 stitches, right? That one stitch is going to turn up and be the side stitch. So we're going to have 20 stitches. We're going to start with our slip knot, which is over here somewhere. It's not written. Chain 21. We're going to work with 20 stitches when we're ready. Single crochet in the second chain from the hook and in each chain across, and you will have 20 stitches. You're going to chain 1 and turn. So that's our chaining up or chaining 1, turning. Single crochet in each stitch across. Now that seems very easy, right? That's what we were learning in class today. Once you practice a little bit, you'll be ready to start this. Repeat row 2 until the piece measures about 6.5 inches from the beginning, and then you're going to fasten off. Okay, I didn't show you how to fasten off. So quickly, let me show you. So let's pretend I'm finished. I did my row, I'm finished, and it's time to fasten off. I have a scissor. Oh, here's my scissor. So to fasten off, you're going to just cut your yarn. You want to leave a tail for finishing, and it should be about 6 inches long. You don't want to make it too long. And then to end it, you're just going to pull your hook straight up until that pops through, and now it's secured. And then I'll show you how to weave in the ends after, but that's how you fasten off. Finishing. You're going to fold the wristers in half, bringing the first row to meet the last. Sew the edges together for 1 inch, leaving a 1.5 inch opening for the thumb. And then you're going to sew the remainder of the edges together and weave in your ends. Now let me show you what that means. So this is what the finished piece will look like. We need to leave space there so we can put our thumb through it. So that's what all those instructions were for, to leave space for the thumb. So when you're finished your crocheting, this is what you're going to end up with. It's going to be like a kind of a square or rectangle. It's more of a rectangle really, but that's what it's going to look like. And I'm going to use a different color yarn for demonstration purposes so that you can see what I'm doing. Obviously, you would use the same yarn. So you would leave a really long tail here. These tails are a little bit short, but you would leave a nice long tail. And we're going to pretend that this is our tail. Okay, so pretend that's my working yarn and that is my tail. So plenty of room. So you fold it in half like this. If you have some like clothespins or something, it's nice to have something to kind of hold everything in place. I use these clips, but you can use any kind of clips that you have. When you're working, it's stretchy, so you might end up stretching your fabric and end up having it, you know, unbalanced like that. So what you want to do is you want to just find a nice corner. Get right there on that corner. Remember, this is my tail, so pretend I didn't add a different color. And when I sew, I like to put my finger in the seam and kind of go across like that. And that helps me keep track of my stitches. So what we're going to look for here, if I were crocheting, I would crochet under each one of these stitches. So I'm going to sew right through them. And the same on the other side, you can see my chain. I'm just going to go through the chain. And so this will help to keep me keeping my stitches all spaced apart, the same distance, and all going the same depth. Like you wouldn't want to, that's a problem with the clips it gets. Like you wouldn't want to do a deep stitch, like and go do something crazy and go down like that. And then do like a really big stitch and come over here, because it's going to look, you're going to really see that and it looks very bad. So that's why you can use your last row of single crochet and your chain to kind of figure out where you're going next. So you want to make sure that you're not going too deep. Keep the yarn on your needle is more helpful. You don't want to go too deep, and you don't want to, you know, skip and make them really wide. So if they're all going the same depth and they're all spaced apart the same, your stitches are going to look very neat. So if you've never sewn before, or you don't know how, or you don't like it, you don't have to worry about it, because this will make it very easy for you. And you'll be using the same yarn you made the project out of. So even if it doesn't look right or great, it's going to blend in and nobody's going to see. Okay. So I've just been talking and I haven't been paying attention. So I probably need to take, because what it wanted us to do was to seam it and then leave space for the thumb. And I was talking and I didn't. So make sure you're paying attention when you're doing it. So instead of measuring it exactly how they're saying, what you might want to do is go ahead and put it on and kind of see how big of a space. Maybe you have a very big thumb, maybe you have a little thumb. So I'm going to leave space for my thumb. And to do that, I'm only going to weave it. I'm going to just sew on one side. So that way I don't want to cut my yarn and reattach it. I'm just going to sew on one side. And again, if you have the same color, it's going to blend in. And then make sure you're pulling it tight so that it doesn't. That's my tail from down below. Put that out of the way. Make sure you're keeping it pulled tight. And then once you've left enough room for your thumb, then, you know, match it up. Make sure you're matching it up and then go across. And then now I'm going to take it off. And you could measure it, but I just like to do that. I like to do it around my hand, and then that way I'm sure. And then finish it off. And you want to pay attention. See, you want to see mine's a little off. So I'm going to just kind of hold those corners together. If they're really off, you might have to undo it. But if it's just a little off, you can make it work. Sorry. And then make sure you're getting that last corner really nice. And you might want to go through it again to kind of just hold that corner together. Now I'm going to show you how to weave in your ends. So crochet stitches are more three-dimensional. They kind of have a front and a back, and there's kind of an inside to them. They're kind of like extra thick. And when you weave your ends, you want to kind of see, I'm going through, if you can see it or not, I'm going through kind of the post of the stitches. I'm going to do it on this bigger one because you can see it better on this bigger one. So let me switch to this big, with the bigger stitches. I think it's easier to see. So I'm going to weave in my ends. So you want to kind of enter that post, kind of that side stitch that maybe that's our chain. And you kind of want to look at your work. You want to kind of follow the pattern in your work. So this is kind of rows. So we kind of want to follow the rows. And you can see here, I'm kind of just going under those two. And then sometimes I go in a straight line across. You want to go about 2 or 3 inches one direction. And here's a test. So I'm going to go through these 2 stitches right here. I'm putting my needle there as kind of as a test. If you turn it over and you can't see your needle, then that means when you pull your yarn through, you won't be able to see your yarn. But if I turn it over and I can see my needle, when I pull my yarn through, there's going to be a strand of yarn going there and it's going to look funny. So that's, as you're learning, make sure you're not going clear through. Make sure you're going through the middle of the stitches and then pull it through. And here's another thing that could happen. You could pull it really tight and cause it to look bad. So just kind of massage it out and maybe just let it rest for just a second. And then we're going to go to the row below. So I'm just going to go through, I like to go through, you can see that kind of group of yarn there. I'm not going through to the other side. And again, you don't want to pull it tight because you can still cause everything to scrunch up. Everything should be comfortable in your hand, not loose, but definitely not tight. And so now I'm going to go back the other direction. And that's what locks it in place. And it will never come unraveled. And you do not ever want to tie knots. You wouldn't just cut it and tie a knot. Knots leave an unsightly bump. Sometimes you can feel the knot and it's, that's not nice. And knots, they come untied. People don't think that the knots were going to come untied, but the knots do come untied and then your work unravels. And I also repair crocheted work. People a lot of times will bring me blankets that their grandmother made that have big holes in them, they're falling apart, and that's because they were tied with knots. The knots come untied and it starts to unravel. Now it can be fixed, but if you avoid it in the first place, it's better. So no knots, we don't tie any knots, we wouldn't, and you wouldn't just cut this off right here because it's gonna unravel. And you wouldn't want to tie a knot because then you're gonna have a big ugly knot right there that could come untied. So this is the best. You want your work to look as professional and as nice as you possibly can. If you're giving these as gifts, or maybe you're going to be able to sell hats and gloves and stuff eventually, you do want them to look professional. You can see I'm not fussing over it. I'm just kind of, and then as you do each one, make sure it's not affecting this side and it looks nice on both sides. Any questions about weaving in your ends?
Well, we are at the end of our class time right now. I'll go ahead and put the links to both the handout and the pattern in the chat again. We also put the links to the next 2 classes in there. We have our next session coming up next Monday. That's the 13th. Same time, it's 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be covering some different crochet stitches in that class. And then on the following Monday, the 20th, we'll show you how to add some shaping to your work because you can make things that aren't squares or rectangles.
And if you're practicing and you're probably going to have a lot of questions once you start practicing, because that's when let me show you, pull this tight, pull it, cut it off, and then when you stretch it back out, it disappears right in. So if you have questions as you're practicing, feel free to contact me on either Instagram or on Facebook. On Facebook, it's just my name spelled out the way it is, and you'll see my picture. On Instagram, maybe Claire will put my Instagram name in the chat. It's Mr. M-I-S-T-E-R spelled out, Mr. Woolly Bear. and you'll see my picture again and you'll know it's me. Feel free to send me a direct message with your questions. I really don't mind. I don't get very many questions. And if it's going to help you practice and keep going, I would love to be able to help you with that. And if you make something, I'd love it if you tag me, and I'd love to see something that if you made, it's nice to see success. So, but let me know if you have questions, if you need additional help, and I guess we'll just see you next week. Anything else, Claire?
Practice, practice, practice. And we're glad you all joined us today.
All right. Yeah, that's where the learning happens, when you practice. All right. Have a great night. Thanks for coming to class.